All right, guys, back by popular demand. You've all requested him, and there's no surprises there because he is the best in the business. He describes himself as the stone that the builder refused on his Twitter, and he joins us here today to break down UFC 308. The one and only Luke Thomas. Thanks for joining me on Submission Radio, man.
I'm happy to be here. I'm delighted to be here, in fact. Thank you for having me.
Dude, we're just on the back of this Francis Ngannou thing, and just quickly, before we move into UFC 308, what was your reaction to his return? It's kind of like a storybook situation here. The guy's been through so much. It was really cool to see him pick this one up over the past weekend at the PFL.
It was nice to see him back in action, just on MMA terms, right? Because it had been 33 months and knee surgery since we'd seen him fight MMA. It'd been nice to see him collect bags in boxing, but those were both losing efforts, one of which was devastating. So it was just nice to see, and I mean this quite sincerely, it was nice to see Francis doing what he does best, which is MMA fight, not boxing. Like, obviously, he turned in a commendable performance against Tyson Fury, all things being what they were, especially with the third round knockdown. But, you know, Joshua fight went real bad. But to see him this way after all this time off, all these questions, all this tragedy, all this somewhat professional setback as well, it was really, really good. I think it was good for him. And just as like an MMA fan, it was nice to see him back where he belongs, quite frankly. I don't know when we'll see it again. I don't know who it's going to be against, but for just this moment in time, I'm glad that Francis got a chance to feel and process some of his grief. I think it's important, and also just great for MMA fans that we got a chance to see the lineal heavyweight champion in MMA doing MMA things. I think all the way around, a good day for MMA fans.
Yeah, man, it was good to see. Obviously, you know, he's the lineal champ. We got Tom Aspinall in the UFC. We got John Jones. Who do you think is the greatest heavyweight in MMA right now?
Francis. I mean, John has one win at heavyweight over a guy who fought terribly. So that's not John's fault, but it's just hard to really give him a high mark from that. Stipe is obviously a legend, but, you know, the last time he fought Ngannou, he got waxed, and he hasn't fought since, and that's been quite some time. Aspinall is certainly the future of the sport. I mean, there's really no denying that. It might even be its present, but some of that is somewhat untested as well, right? And there are flaws to his game that haven't been exploited. Francis is proven. Francis is a guy who has fought the best, or at least what's been offered and available to him. He has beaten very good guys. He has put together highlight reels. He has dabbled in another sport. He is, he earned that title, the lineal heavyweight champion. I mean, dude, PFL never brought this up, but if you realize it, the UFC Pride Strikeforce title plus the Bellator plus the PFL title all got unified on one night by Francis. I mean, think about that for a second. Like, it's Francis. Francis is the top guy at heavyweight. I'm not declaring to you it's because he beat Renan Ferreira, but the overall record of achievement as well as the activity and now this unification, I think, certainly helps his case.
Dude, I love that unification point. I didn't even think of it. Obviously, people are saying, what would a Tom Aspinall, Francis Ngannou fight even look like? Who would you pick in that one, you reckon?
So here's the thing. I mean, listen, Aspinall can cover distance so fast. He's so quick. That was one of the things that we noted with Renan Ferreira, that as limited as he is very fast feet, very fast hands. So, I certainly take Aspinall's ability to win very seriously, but gun to my head, I would pick right now. I would pick Francis. I think Francis is much more battle tested. I mean, like, what does Aspinall look like in the third round of a tough contest? We have no idea. Francis has been there. Francis has done that. Francis has fought fast guys. Francis has fought big punchers. Francis has fought guys who can wrestle to a degree anyway. And so, I think Aspinall could do damage to anybody in this division, but Francis has more ways to win and has fought, relatively speaking, better competition. I would go with him.
We don't need to see this Deontay Wilder fight, do we, in boxing with Francis? So he's just come back.
I mean, Jesus, dude, I can't. It's hard to overstate this. Deontay Wilder, I don't think was ever quite the American attraction that some had hoped he would be, but the guy had a good career. He had a very good career. He's washed beyond anything. Like, I'm not even like who's actively competing that would be available for A-level fights, right? Like somebody whose name is circulated, who's more washed than him. Like literally not even Stipe. I mean, maybe the answer would be Stipe, but we don't even know that because at least he hasn't been out there getting exposed, you know? Mm-hmm. So in terms of like known commodities whose names are still bandied about among like other A-list possible fights, he's the most washed guy in combat sports. And it pains me to kind of say that, but it's just the reality of where we are. So listen, Jake Paul's going to fight Mike Tyson. Like, you can be mega washed, but if there's money for it and they can package it in some kind of way, they'll make it. I don't think that Deontay Wilder versus Francis in boxing gets us the same kind of, it doesn't get made for the same kind of reasons that Tyson versus Paul gets made, but it's not impossible to imagine. So I'm with you. I hope that it doesn't. Gun to my head, I would bet that it probably doesn't, but it's not a runaway that it doesn't get made. Like, there is a real chance that it could. It's just, God, I hope not.
All right, man. Well, let's talk about UFC 308. We're talking about strikers here. The other time you came on, you did a great breakdown for the Alex Pereira fight, but we never really spoke about Ilia Topuria and where he ranks as one of the best strikers in the UFC. Obviously, his boxing is devastating. His punching power is incredible. Where do you rank him, man, when it comes to the best strikers in the UFC and even the best boxers?
It's hard to know how to rank some of this stuff because I don't think he's got the full Topuria. I don't think he's got the full well-rounded ability of a kickboxer. I mean, he can do a little bit of it, but it's really not what he does to the point you raised. He's more of a boxer. And so, you know, like, where does he rate among MMA strikers? It's like, well, like, how effective is his particular style of striking to what he wants to do? And the answer is, you know, devastatingly. But, like, you know, does he have the most well-rounded striking ability? No, he doesn't. But to me, he's easily top 5, probably top 3 boxer in UFC. His ability to set patterns and then change them, his ability to disrupt rhythm, his ability to work behind the jab, his ability to marry an offensive and then immediately a defensive action right behind it. And you might say, well, how relevant is that? Your countryman, Tim Tszyu, just had that problem over the weekend where he'd land a punch, he'd have an offensive action, and he wouldn't marry it with a defensive action. And so therefore he gets clipped and he has big problems. I'm not saying that Topuria is a better boxer than Tim Tszyu. I'm simply saying inside MMA, he's still keeping up with some of those P's and Q's. You've already mentioned it. It's well known. He's an absolutely devastating puncher. I think he's the best puncher, certainly below 155 pounds, no question about it. And I wonder where he stacks up at 155, to be perfectly honest. I think he could probably hold his own up there. We know his power carries based on the Jai Herbert fight. He's got good footwork. He's got good defensive fundamentals with his guard. I mean, he is absolutely superb as a striking talent. He is fearsome as a finisher, and he is relentless as an attacker, not in a berserker kind of way, but in a focused effort kind of way the entire way through. I bring this point up all the time. On all 3 judges' scorecards, he lost the first round to Volk. Do you think that bothered him even a little bit? He wasn't trying to win the first round. He was trying to establish patterns that he could then break to get Volk into some kind of trap so he could land a devastating punch, which is exactly what he did. I mean, if you can one-punch KO, and I understand fully, I fully understand that part of what's happened was that Volk took that fight too early after the Islam KO. I understand that. I don't think that would have saved him on that night anyway. I think if Ilia puts hands on you with the kind of force and power and timing, by the way, he's got fantastic timing and accuracy. He's got some of the best accuracy. Also, I didn't even mention this. I think he's got some of the, like, what's one of Ilia Topuria's best punches? The left hook to the liver. Got devastating. I mean, he froze Damon Jackson in place like Medusa before he clobbered him with that shot, right? He just couldn't move. And so this is what I mean. It's like there's different ways to kind of assess who the best striker is or who the best boxer is. But for the purposes of what he does and the way in which he does it, if he's not at or near the top of your list is trash.
Here's one for you. Who do you think is the most devastating KO artist in featherweight history? Is it him or is it Conor McGregor in his prime?
Ugh.
And imagine those two fighting in their prime.
Well, I tell you what. I would still give it to Conor. Because Again, I don't think it would have mattered if Volk had taken that fight 6 months later, 9 months later, a year later. I still think he was going to get stretched. I do believe that. I just don't think he can handle his punching power. Just no doubt in my mind. And people being like, oh, well, he fought defensively. He fought defensively because the guy he was up against made him fight that way. But all right, putting that aside, there are still questions about it, and I fully respect that. There's no question about Jose Aldo's readiness for that fight, and Conor stretched him in 13 seconds. Like, that alone is impressive. Certainly, you could go down the line, even his UFC debut, Marcus Brimage kind of putting him away pretty quickly, the first Dustin Poirier fight pretty quickly, and you can sort of go on down the list. So I tend to think that Topuria will end up having a better resume, but you got to beat guys like Max Holloway first, who, by the way, stopped Jose Aldo twice with strikes himself, to be eligible for that kind of consideration.
So let's talk about the striking matchup between Max, because Max, he has all sorts of different abilities and skills when it comes to his striking. He's able to do the crazy stuff that we've seen him do, but he's also able to be strategic at the end of his jab and use his kicks to keep him on the distance. What are you expecting here from Max as he approaches this Ilia fight? Because Ilya's clearly trying to get into Max's head, right? He's trying to get him to point to the ground. He's trying to get him to exchange with him. And at the end of the day, like, you know, that is what Max also loves to do. Are you expecting a strategic performance from Max here? Or do you believe he's like, you know what? Nah, I'm the BMF. I point to the ground. I'm the one who, what do you think is going to happen here?
No, Max is a quality fighter. I mean, even the last fight with Volkanovski, 276, where he's losing handily. You saw him kind of pick up the pace a little bit towards the end of that fight, but he never fought recklessly. He never said, screw it, we'll just go out there. And I understand he did it against Justin Gaethje. It's kind of a newer thing, but he was like well ahead in that fight, right? So maybe if he's like beating the shit out of Topuria, he might do something late in that fight too. But again, it's just the last 10 seconds. It's not really, you know, it's dangerous, but it's a limited window. But I bring up the Volkanovski fight because Volkanovski just had his number that night, and he kind of still, you know, you can say, oh, well, he should have had more urgency, but, you know, more urgency when you're not sure what to do. You know, people think that like, oh, that could lead to a better outcome. Yeah, it could, but it most often leads to an even worse one, right? That's what no one ever tells you. It's like if things are going badly and you're not sure about what to do, simply trying to berserk on someone, that's what someone who, like, again, maybe that's your only option, right? That actually can happen where like you literally are in a fight, you've tried everything, you don't know what to do, screw it, throw caution to the wind, because what else could happen? That is a legitimate way in which you can arrive at a position in a fight. But even if you do that, more often than not, you're going to get stretched for it, right? You're going to get in big trouble for it. And so you saw him kind of raise the intensity a little bit, but he never got out of it. He never got out of like what I would call a strategic way of thinking. I don't think he's going to give Topuria that kind of luxury. I mean, you can't fight a guy like Ilia Topuria, who's got the youth, who has blinding punching power, who's accurate, all the things we've mentioned. You can't give that guy that kind of an opportunity and expect to win. You're not going to get your title back. In all likelihood, you know, Max has got a legendary chin, but for basically anybody else, I would say you're going to wake up looking at the lights. No, he's going to fight this guy strategically. Again, if he runs out to a big lead and it goes the full 5, will he do the point at the mat? Probably almost without hesitation, because Max got that a little bit of crazy Hawaiian in him, but he is an excellent quality fighter, one of the best to ever do it in this weight class. If Ilia Topuria is going to beat Max, he's going to have to earn it the hard way.
So tell me how that happens. Do you believe that Max thinks that kicks to the leg are a way to sort of slow Ilia down, and keeping him on the outside is eventually going to beat Ilia up as he tries to get on the inside throughout the fight? How are you anticipating Max's game plan here? Because we noticed in the Volk fight, even Volk threw a few leg kicks at Topuria, and it's interesting to see what that would look like over 5 rounds as they end up, you know, getting more and more damage on that front leg.
I think that could go either way, the front leg damage, because Max is big about it too, right? Where to me, I really do believe this. I don't think that this by itself is going to win the fight, but what I'm about to say, I think is going to be the kind of ingredient that sets the table ultimately for the winning fighter. And this is going to sound kind of obvious, maybe. I mean, maybe not. I really believe that the person in this fight who does the best job, both early but consistently, of establishing their jab wins. And it's not because that the jab itself is going to land in some kind of way that's going to fuck up the other person, although that obviously is on the table too, but because of all the things it will enable. It will enable more sustained combination attack. It will enable potentially rhythm disruption. It will enable distance closing or angle change or all the things that a jab can do. But both guys are pretty effective with the jab. You're asking about Max. Max in particular, I think, is a heavy, consistent jabber to the body, jab up high, by the way. So now you're playing the low high game. It can change up your rhythm. It can change up your targeting. It can change up the anticipation of what to expect. It can add new wrinkles to your feinting. I mean, that low high game off the jab, guys, that's how Topuria, he set a rhythm and then disrupted it, or set a pattern, I should say, and then disrupted it. This is how Topuria beat Volk. That's how he did it. So I think the jab is going to be absolutely one of the critical fault lines there. Who can really establish that with any kind of degree of effectiveness and consistency? The second part is, if you're Ilia Topuria, one thing you have to know is, what are we going to do to solve for Max's movement? Now, he's not going to be moving super laterally like the way that Volkanovski did. He's going to be a little bit more in the pocket. By the way, I think that makes him more hittable.
Yeah.
However, one thing that Max is really good at, and this is one I go to, I mean, dude, folks forget, Max stopped Jose Aldo with strikes in back-to-back fights. I mean, that's just one of the most like mind-blowing things you've ever considered in your life. And what's interesting about those fights, and I remember watching this in real time, I talked about this before, he circled one way the first fight all the way through, turning Jose Aldo the whole time. And then the second fight, he turned him the other direction, right? Max is big on pivots. He's not a big stance switcher, but he will as somebody goes past him to enable him to have an attack a la Marvin Hagler. So movement to a degree, pivoting, angle change off the jab, some lateral movement, I think will be part of it as well. All of these things are a function of Max having both some dominion of the jab as well as real estate around him. And what do we know that Ilia Topuria likes to do? He likes to pressure guys. He likes to pressure them backwards close to the fence. Sometimes Max has been accepting of that, but it's under different circumstances, not necessarily guys heavy punchers. Volk in the third fight had him really backed up, but I think Max was a little bit more accepting of that at times, although then they got reversed as well. I've seen Volk spend a lot of time on the outside too. But the point I'm trying to make here is controlling for Max's real estate, both whether he is moving laterally or whether he is turning, and in particular, turning off the jab. You mentioned the leg kick. There'll probably be some of that as well. Jab up high, jab to the body. So that jab and then Max's movement, whether linear or rotational, are going to be things that if you're Ilia Topuria, you obviously have to solve for these problems. Again, two of the key fault lines I think this fight hinges on.
Super hard to predict this one. I think Ilia gets it done, but how are you feeling about it? Who do you think is going to get it done?
I would be very surprised if Max got KO'd. I would be very surprised by that. Not to say that, I mean, you know, you play a dangerous game long enough that it eventually gets you, but Max has an extraordinary ability to absorb damage, and I think that will do him some good here. I also think that, you know, Ilia Topuria, you know, listen, he's beaten good guys in 5-round fights. Check Josh Emmett. That's a tough guy. And obviously Volk is one of the best to ever do it, although I don't think Volk has the physical resiliency of a guy like Max. So, you know, in certain ways, this is the toughest fight of Topuria's career, right? I mean, like, Max has been tested at his limits much more than Topuria has, much more. And so we just have a keener sense of things. My hunch is that Topuria finds a way to get it done. I do think, though, that it goes to a decision, and I wouldn't be surprised if Max snags a round or even two off of him. But I think Topuria, I cannot overstate this. He is not inaccurate. By the way, not likely, but there's a chance of wrestling in this one, too. Black belt in jiu-jitsu. He's got ferocious, dynamite ground and pound, a physical style all the way through it. And Max is a little bit hittable. I think it's a bad combination that he can be touched that much and you're dealing with a guy who's that accurate and that powerful. That seems to me like a bad combination over the course of 5 rounds. I think Topuria probably gets it done.
I love that you mentioned the grappling and the wrestling as well, because one day we're going to see Topuria pull that cat out of the bag and be like, hey, by the way, I've got this over here and no one's even thinking about it. It'll be interesting to see if it happens in this fight. If it is Max and Volkanovski 4, and I remember Volk told me one day, and he was frustrated. He said, is the UFC just going to keep giving me Max Holloway until I lose? And now it's funny because we've come around and he's like, hey, I want this Max Holloway fight in Sydney, UFC 312. How do you think a fourth fight between these guys go? It's kind of one of the most interesting rivalries now in the sport with a fourth fight, and everything's so different in going into this fourth
I mean,
fight.
after that third fight, you would have never imagined a world where you would pick Max over Volk. But if Max KO Justin Gaethje, and let's say he beats Ilia, and you've got Volk coming off of this loss, to the same guy, you might favor Max. You might just be like, well, it's just a different ball game now. You got Max reborn. But by the way, Max has been really working on, his trainers told me this, they've been really working on his power. What if he stops Topuria? Like that's a possibility too, I still feel like Volk has got the right style to give Max problems, but you give me a world where they're going to make a fourth one because he has beaten Ilia Topuria, I think all bets are off. I think honestly, we should just say it out loud. If Max comes back from, UFC 276, where he lost to that, as one-sided as it could have been, basically, against Volk, certainly relative to the other two, and then he goes and he beats the Rodriguezes of the world and the Arnold Allens of the world, and you name it, all those guys, and then he goes up to 55 and KOs Justin Gaethje, and then reclaims the featherweight belt by beating Ilia Topuria, you're talking about one of the most miraculous recaptures of the title in all of UFC history, frankly, all of MMA history. I know there's been times where guys may have gotten a belt with a longer expanse of time between losing it and regaining it, but we're talking about an insanely difficult division. We're talking about I would think, to me, this is the best fight you can make in all of MMA. I consider both of these guys, whether they are or not, it's certainly at some point, Max has been pound for pound talent. I think Topuria is. This is what Max is attempting should not be possible. It should not be possible. If he achieves it, and I'm Volkanovski, I'm like, this is a brand new guy. He's going to have some of the same tendencies, but the firepower might be different. The confidence might be different. The strategy might be different. He might have really learned and leveled up from all of this. If he achieves this, he is achieving something that should not be possible. But if anybody can do that, it's Max Holloway.
Thank our sponsor, MANSCAPED, who makes it possible for Submission Radio to stick around and bring you these interviews that you guys are enjoying. 20% off at MANSCAPED with the code word submission at manscaped.com and free shipping. And I want to talk to you about something a little different today, and that is their amazing Beard and Dome bundle. That features the Dome Shaver Pro and the Beard Hedger. What is the Dome Shaver Pro, you ask? Well, it's a little beast that comes with 5 premium rotary blades optimized specifically for head shaving. You got the Manscaped skin-safe technology that means you don't have to experience nicks and cuts. Whether you're new to head shaving or a seasoned pro, this feature offers peace of mind. And what about the versatility with the fact that it's fully waterproof, so you can use it wet or dry, take it in the shower for a quick and convenient shave. The cleanup is a breeze. And don't forget, you get that high-performance 9,500 RPM motor. Oh, baby. This powerful motor provides a consistent and effective shave every time. No more dealing with patchy or uneven results. The Dome Shaver Pro gets it done every time, and perfect to put in your gym bag after a big session at the gym. Boom! The Dome Shaver Pro has you sorted. You guys know about the Beard Hedger with its 20 different length options. It's the perfect companion for sculpting and styling your facial hair with ease. It's waterproof as well. You can trim with confidence in the sink or shower. 60 minutes of runtime on a single charge. The Beard and Dome bundle from Manscaped is now available. It's the perfect duo. Get 20% off with the code word submission. That's 20% off with the code word submission. And now back to the interview. You're talking about the odds. Actually, Alex was talking to Christian, our videographer in Sydney, and he said that he can't believe that Robert Whittaker, just moving on to the next fight, is the underdog going into this fight with Khamzat Chimaev. What's your reaction, man? Do you think the odds have this one wrong? Should Rob be the underdog?
That's a tough one. It's a tough one because Rob's a former champion, right? has basically beaten everybody except Izzy and DDP. I mean, that's not quite true, obviously, but he's got losses at welterweight or whatever. But that's basically what we're working with. He is insanely well-rounded. He is insanely disciplined. He is insanely technical. He learns from mistakes super well. Like you catch him with one mistake one time, it's very hard to catch him again. I mean, it can be done a little bit, but in general, he levels up between mistakes like a lot. And he's beaten better guys than Chimaev has, like flatly. Like there's not even an argument for that. He has beaten better guys than Chimaev has. But the problem is he's 33. He'll be 34 in December. Now, Chimaev's not super young. He's 30 himself. Obviously the history of pulling out of fights, these ailments that keep derailing him, and the fact that he's never beaten a guy of Rob's quality, certainly if you're probably Aussie or anybody else, would make you go, well, should this guy really be the favorite, Khamzat Chimaev? And the answer is yes. And the reason why I say that is because it shouldn't be much, or at least at a bare minimum, I can understand why he would be the favorite. He's got a physical style of attacking, wrestling, and grappling that is not what Yoel Romero did. It is much more concentrated on being able to find the back and work from it, which is something Yoel Romero never was able to do. He's quicker. He's heavy-handed, absolutely ruthless, unafraid, and just able to have a marauding game plan. And you can see like he can technically overwhelm guys. So he's got this real intense marriage of physicality and technicality, especially early. Now, there are obviously questions, all the things I've mentioned already, not least of which is you've never fought a guy like Rob in the trenches and had to go long distances. Please correct me if I'm wrong. Is this one 5 rounds or 3?
Good question. Let me check.
We should double check that. If it's 5 rounds, that to me favors a little bit more Rob, because as you saw, we had this like physical outburst against Gilbert Burns from Khamzat Chimaev, and he came up a little bit short as that fight went on. I know he got his hand raised, but Gilbert Burns was putting it on him the longer that fight went. And Gilbert Burns also very technical, and that was a weight class down. So you would imagine like if Rob can weather the storm, geez, man, he might be able to really do something to this guy if it goes as long as I am suggesting, or as long as it could. The thing for me is this: Dricus du Plessis is not the most technical guy, but he's physically rough, and that just seemed to give Rob all kinds of problems. I do think Rob's chin and durability has been diminished somewhat over time. That's just natural. There's no way to get around that. You take a lot of punches, that's what's going to happen to you. And that the takedown where he was just able to kind of sag his weight down and then like Tozy pass him. These are like rough styles of takedowns, rough styles of passing. Khamzat can do that like at a much higher level in terms of the various specifics, but also the physicality of it. I think that's a bad matchup for Rob. So it's not to me to declare that I think Khamzat will win, but I can at least understand where the odds makers might have been coming from when they assess how these two match up.
It is a 5-round fight, and it's interesting because Rob's obviously one of the best to do it at middleweight, especially when it comes to Australian fighters. But, he starts off notoriously slow, and then he builds up as the fight goes on. And Khamzat starts off big in the first round. That's the round that everybody is afraid of when it comes to Khamzat. So is it a situation for you, Luke, where if Rob is able to weather the first couple of rounds, it starts to go into his favor as the fight goes on?
It should. The question is, has Khamzat learned to apportion his offense effectively? I mean, if you're a strong starter, that is something you should lean into, but never at the expense of being unable to maintain sufficient amount of offense late in the fight, right? Where what he did in the Gilbert Burns fight was just go absolutely ham. Or pick the Kamaru Usman fight. He goes ham in the first round, but then kind of faded down the stretch. Well, if you're going to fade down the stretch and you're not going to put these guys away early, you can see that's going to be a problem for you. So he can't do that. He can't do that. So this is going to be one of those tests, frankly, of Khamzat's fight IQ, or honestly, the systemic health that he's dealing with, right? He might be in a situation, and we don't even know this, but he might be in a situation where he doesn't have that much cardio anymore. Like whatever damage has been done to him by the various illnesses, communicable diseases that he has, he can't go the full 15 or even much less 25 minutes, right? It could actually be that, in which case sprinting at the front of the fight is what is your only choice. But I guess what I'm operating under is the concept that like maybe that's not the case, that he can apportion it. So again, I do want to see him start strong, but maintain a consistent kind of like thumb on the scale rather than Donkey Kong in that thing the whole time, which is what he does early. Just try to break the toy immediately rather than applying consistent pressure over time. This is going to be a test of his fight IQ because you don't have these questions about Rob. You don't have to ask questions about Rob about, is he going to have cardio late? You know he is. You know he is. You know, even if he has to work in the first few rounds, he's going to have cardio late. It's a foregone conclusion. We don't know that about Khamzat. We don't know if he's got that in him. He has this attitude. Like, I often see this, right? I see this. Someone's like, this guy's a great prospect. And you'll look at their record. They'll be like 7-0. And you look at their record and they'll have 7 first-round KOs. And they'll be like, isn't he great? And I'm like, okay, so he's obviously got ability and some power, but he hasn't fought anybody yet. Like, you can't fight good people and go 7-0 with 7 first-round KOs. It doesn't work that way. You might beat 1 or 2 good people, but you're not going to beat 7 that way. One of those guys is going to push you to the second, and one of them is going to take you to the third, and one of them is going to put it on you. And now how do you answer for it? Khamzat has been fighting everyone like he's just going to blow them out in the first. And a lot of times that does happen, or, you know, second or whatever, you know, like they don't stand up to it. I don't know if it makes a lot of sense to fight Rob that way, even with his slow starting. I don't know if it makes sense. I think it makes a little bit more sense to make sure you've got something in your reservoir that allows you to attack over the course of the bout's duration, ... unless he really is fucked up and he can't do that anymore, in which case sprint and see what happens.
Do you think Rob's grappling ability is underrated?
I do think he's a very good grappler and a very good wrestler, but I don't think he's a...
He was going to be on the Commonwealth team for Australia for wrestling at one point.
That's not nothing, but I don't think he's going to be a match for Khamzat's physique. I mean that sincerely.
Because when I caught up with him in Sydney, by the way, he chose to spy Jai Opatai, which is another thing about Rob. It's like, dude, this guy's one of the best. Technically, he's one of the best boxers to come out of Australia right now. He is just a killer. And he chose to have a very competitive 3 rounds with him in front of media. Like, dude, you're not, boxing isn't your first thing, but you choose to do that in front of media. It just shows Rob just wants to, fight the best of the best. But he told me this isn't going to be a wrestling match. Like, I am going to stop the takedown, but it's not going to be a wrestling match. That's what Khamzat keeps saying. It's wrestling, 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 but this is going to be an MMA fight. That's Rob's stance on it,
Again, it really is, dude. There's so much about Khamzat that even this far into his UFC career, he's a bit of an enigma. Like, we actually don't really know. Like, he keeps graduating slowly up the food chain because of all the time off and everything else, right? And so it's like, how does he look against credentialed, opposition like this? Like, we don't know. I mean, Gilbert Burns was the closest thing, but that was down a weight class, and that was a while ago. And I'll say this: if Khamzat fights Robert the way he fought Gilbert, Rob's winning that fight. Like, I mean, I'm not saying that Rob's grappling is on par with Gilbert. Gilbert was a black belt world champion, but I think that that kind of style of fight would suit Rob really well if Khamzat can't maintain. But just like pure grappling, again, dude, one of the things like with Khamzat is like his level change from here into here, and then the penetration step is like lightning. It's like lightning. And a lot of these guys who are wrestler types, including Kamaru Usman, they'll get a cradle if they get to the top position, or like with Yoel Romero, he'd kind of just put his weight on you and then throw hooks. That's not what Khamzat does. He can take the back. He can tear you off of his base or your base. He can go for submissions. He's got ferocious ground and pound. He's got great rides, crab rides, wrist rides, cross wrist rides. I mean, you name it, he's got it. I tend to think that, and he's got a very physically in your face kind of style. Again, we'll see if Rob. I'll tell you what, if Rob can stand up to that, you got to give him a title shot after that. But I tend to think he's going to have some problems with it.
Feels like both guys have a lot to lose here, right? This is Rob's last crack. He said he'll be retiring in a couple of years, potentially. Khamzat, he hasn't been able to be healthy for a while, and this is his crack at sort of having a shot at the title. And if this doesn't go well for him, who knows what's next? Who do you think has more to lose here?
Khamzat. Whittaker was already champion. Whittaker's already an Australian MMA legend. Whittaker is... I'm not going to say that this is not important for him. It's obviously extremely important, and it could do a lot for his legacy. It's not to say that there's nothing on the line there, but Rob already did a bunch of awesome things. Rob already accomplished a lot. Rob already beat the best of his generation. Again, eventually they got the best of him too, but he was at the mountaintop. Khamzat hasn't done any of that. Khamzat hasn't achieved even a fraction of that. Rob is infinitely more accomplished as a mixed martial artist than Khamzat Chimaev. To your point, Chimaev is just trying to get to a place. He's trying to arrive at a place. This is a second helping for Rob. So no, there's no doubt in my mind that Chimaev, and again, it's not like Rob is some scrub, but if Chimaev wants to be a champion in this weight class, you have to beat this guy. I mean, this is the only thing you can use as a measuring stick to see if you're ready for those guys at the top of the division at all. And he hasn't beaten anyone in this division of note. Rob's beaten a lot of guys in this division of note. No, Rob has much, much, much less to lose here.
Let's say Rob goes out there, stops Khamzat. Khamzat goes out there, stops Rob. Should the winner be the next person for DDP, or do you want to see Sean Strickland get this rematch? Because they haven't announced it yet. They haven't announced it yet.
I'm mixed feelings. The first fight between, I don't know why people suggest that the first fight between Sean Strickland and DDP was like a great fight. It wasn't some terrible fight or anything like that. I'm not going to bag on it, but there was nothing like remarkable about it. It wasn't special in any particular way. Also, what's interesting about these Sean Strickland fights is he has a way of like defining the terms with like this trench warfare where one guy lobs and another guy lobs, and it's a lot of defense. Some stuff gets through, but a lot doesn't. It's kind of hard to like tally it all up in the end. And that's why he kind of lost that contest, because I went back and I watched it, and I remember thinking, like, upon rewatch, I thought Strickland won that fight, but I didn't in real time because it seems like DDP threw the heavier stuff. So it's like you're probably going to get more of that again. And it's like, does Sean have a case? He certainly does. And he probably is already going to get it. But honestly, I think if Khamzat were to finish Robert Whittaker, I would think that would be a much more interesting challenge for DDP than a second go round of Sean. So I personally feel like whoever wins this, if they win by stoppage, it should be them. But whether the UFC agrees is a totally different matter.
All right, man. As we wrap up, obviously Ankalaev Rakic is on the card. That's going to be an interesting one. But as we wrap up, my question to you is about Shara Bullet. I want to know, what are you expecting from him in this fight with Arman? And if he does have another signature win at UFC 308, is it time to start bringing up the opponent's skill levels and seeing how this guy does with some of the guys in the top 15? He's certainly got a lot of fans excited about him. He's like the next kind of Khamzat in a lot of ways, Yeah, I've not seen anything from him that tells me he's like extra special. I don't know what people are fucking talking about. First of all, I don't know him as a person, but based on some of the stuff in his history, he doesn't seem like the nicest guy. So there's a problem there. But if we're just actually assessing his fighting ability, he's obviously good. I don't know what people would point to tell you like he's fantastic or great. He's I'm not saying he's not talented. He's talented. I'm not saying he doesn't deserve to be here. He does. He should beat Arman Petrosyan, but I don't think it's like any foregone conclusion that he does. To be very clear, his ground game is extremely suspect. Some of his decision making about when to throw kicks at what ranges and in what situations, to me, is very suspect. I've seen flashes of brilliance. Certainly, he's got a decent athletic ability and he's got the look. But people have anointed this guy. I mean, it's so funny who gets anointed and who doesn't. Like, people were, this is going to be hard for people to remember, but people were not sold on Khabib Nurmagomedov being anything until like a little while into his UFC run, similar to Ilia Topuria. Like, no one was like, when Topuria was beating up Damon Jackson, like that was a nice win, but like no one was being like, that's the next guy, or very few anyway. And then like some of these guys come off the regional scene and they get anointed. And sometimes that works. Like Conor McGregor came into the UFC with a ton of hype and then delivered on it. But I'll tell you what, a lot of times these guys come out of the regional scene with a ton of hype, and I really don't understand what it's for. So let me just be as clear as I can. I believe he is the favorite to beat Petrosyan. And again, he probably should, but I don't think it's a foregone conclusion that he will. I need to see it. And there are a lot of questions about his ability, not just in the grappling, that make me at least want to say, if I'm being as fair as possible, let's wait and see a little bit more from him before we declare like who he's ready for, because from what I've seen up to this point has been good. It's not been special. It's the same thing with Raul Rosas Jr. He's much younger, it's a different situation. But people being like, he's a grappling prodigy. No, he's not.
No, he's not. He's not in any way, shape, or form a grappling prodigy. He's not a grappling prodigy in sport jiu-jitsu, and he's not a grappling prodigy in MMA. That people don't know what the word prodigy means. That is absolutely in no way, shape, or form even remotely true. Is he good? Yes, he is very good. He's very good on the ground, certainly. I give him a lot of respect. He's talented. He's tough to deal with. He's not a prodigy. And like the idea that the rest of that's going to come together for him to beat like really good guys in the UFC very much remains to be seen. Now, his situation is different because he's so young. We have plenty of time for him to come along just the right way. And every time I see him, he definitely gets better and better. So let's keep that going. All that's headed in the right direction. But for Shara Bullet, people are like, oh, he's this, he's that. He hasn't proven to me hardly anything at all. Let's see how it goes on Saturday, and then we'll course correct if we need to.
Well, if you want to see how it goes on Saturday or Sunday here in Australia, make sure to jump on Luke Thomas's YouTube channel, man. You usually start your live reaction from the co-main. Is that right? Is that what? Yep.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to, but it's better for business if I do. So yeah, I do.
All right, so people can jump on, check out the post-fight coverage and the live reactions as the fights happen. And of course, you and BC Morning Combat. Just for those who might have missed it, what days are you guys doing now? I know there's been a few updates.
Yeah, it's Mondays and Fridays live at 11 a.m. in the Eastern Standard Time. Mm-hmm.
That's right. And of course, follow the man at Luke Thomas News. Going to be a big fight, man. And of course, a big preview before it. Thank you so much, Luke. I really appreciate you, man.
Thank you, buddy.